In July 1518, a woman named Frau Trophea stepped into the streets of Strasbourg and began to dance. She did not dance out of joy or celebration. She danced as though possessed, her body moving in frantic, uncontrolled rhythms. She danced through the afternoon, into the evening, and through the night. She danced without stopping. Within days, dozens of others joined her. Within weeks, hundreds were dancing. They danced until their feet bled, until they collapsed from exhaustion, until some of them died. This was not a festival. It was not a riot. It was a plague. A dancing plague. The dancing plague of 1518 remains one of the most bizarre and disturbing events in recorded history. Witnesses described scenes of chaos. People jerking wildly in the streets, unable to stop, their faces twisted in agony. Physicians were baffled. Religious leaders declared it divine punishment. City officials, desperate to end the madness, made decisions that only made things worse. For weeks, the city of Strasbourg was gripped by an inexplicable epidemic of compulsive dancing. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. No one could fully explain what had happened. No one could say with certainty why it started or why it ended. But the scars it left, both physical and psychological, lingered for generations. In this video, we shall shine the light on one of the most mysterious mass phenomena in European history and explore the theories that attempt to explain how hundreds of people danced themselves to death. This is the story of fear, suffering, and the day an entire city lost control. To understand the dancing plague of 1518, one must first understand the world in which it occurred. Strasbourg in the early 16th century was a city under siege, not by armies, but by famine, disease, and social collapse. The plague was not an isolated incident of madness. It was the culmination of decades of suffering, and it erupted in a population already pushed to the brink. Strasbourg, located in the Alsace region along the Rhine River, was a prosperous trading city. But by the early 1500s, prosperity had given way to hardship. The region had been devastated by repeated famines. Harvests failed year after year, and food became scarce. Malnutrition was widespread and starvation was common. The poor, who made up the majority of the population, lived in squalor. Disease spread rapidly through crowded, unsanitary neighborhoods. Smallpox, syphilis, and leprosy ravaged the population. The Black Death, though less frequent than in previous centuries, still flared up periodically, killing thousands. The social fabric of Strasbourg was fraying. The city was governed by a wealthy elite who lived in comfort while the poor struggled to survive. Resentment simmered. The Catholic Church, which wielded enormous power, was seen by many as corrupt and indifferent to the suffering of ordinary people. Religious guilt and fear pervaded daily life. People believed that disasters, famines, and plagues were punishments from God for collective sin. The idea that suffering was divine retribution was not abstract theology. It was lived reality. Into this world of hunger, disease, and religious terror came a belief in the power of saints to curse as well as to bless. In Alsace, there was a widespread fear of Saint Vitus, a Christian martyr who was believed to have the power to inflict a dancing curse on sinners. Those who angered Saint Vitus, it was said, would be struck with uncontrollable dancing as punishment. This belief was not confined to folklore. It was taken seriously by both the common people and the educated classes. By the summer of 1518, Strasbourg was a city on edge. The harvest had been poor again, food prices were rising, disease was spreading. And then, on a hot July day, a woman named Frau Trophea walked into the street and began to dance. The outbreak began on July 14, 1518. Frau Trophea, a middle-aged woman, stepped into a narrow street in Strasbourg and started dancing. Her movements were not graceful or rhythmic. They were erratic, violent, and relentless. She twisted and jerked, her arms flailing, her feet pounding the cobblestones. She danced alone, but she did not stop. At first, onlookers assumed she was drunk or suffering from some kind of fit. But as the hours passed and she continued to dance, concern turned to alarm. She danced through the afternoon, into the night, and into the next day. Her husband pleaded with her to stop, She could not, or would not. Her feet began to bleed. She collapsed from exhaustion, but as soon as she regained consciousness, she started dancing again. Within a week, more than 30 people had joined her. They danced in the same frantic, uncontrolled manner. Men, women, rich, poor, it made no difference. They danced as though driven by an invisible force. Witnesses described their faces as blank, their eyes unfocused. Some seemed to be in a trance. Others screamed in terror, begging for the dancing to stop, but their bodies would not obey. By the end of the month, the number had swollen to nearly 400. The streets of Strasbourg became a nightmarish spectacle. Dancers moved in chaotic clusters, colliding with one another, stumbling over bodies, and continuing without pause. The sound of hundreds of feet pounding the stones, accompanied by cries of pain and exhaustion, filled the air. The city was paralyzed. Markets closed, daily life ground to a halt. All attention turned to the plague. The authorities, desperate to understand what was happening, consulted physicians. The medical consensus at the time was based on the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Physicians believed that the dancing was caused by an imbalance of hot blood, which had overheated the brain and caused a kind of fever-induced madness. Their prescribed treatment was both logical by the standards of the time and utterly disastrous in practice. They recommended more dancing. City officials, following this advice, hired musicians and opened guild halls and public spaces to accommodate the dancers. The theory was that if the dancers danced continuously, they would eventually exhaust the fever and collapse, after which they could be treated. Stages were erected. Bands played lively music. Professional dancers were hired to encourage the afflicted. The authorities genuinely believed they were helping. They were not. The sight and sound of music only seemed to intensify the compulsion. More people joined. The dancing became more frenzied. Dancers collapsed from heart attacks, strokes, and sheer exhaustion. Some died on the spot. Others were carried away, only to return and resume dancing as soon as they regained strength. Estimates suggest that at the peak of the outbreak, as many as 15 people were dying each day. Witnesses recorded scenes of horror: bodies lying in the streets, dancers with bloodied feet stumbling over corpses, families weeping as loved ones danced themselves to unconsciousness. The city, already battered by famine and disease, was now gripped by a phenomenon that defied all explanation. By late August, the city council realized that their intervention had failed. They banned public music and closed the guild halls. They ordered the dancers to be taken to a mountaintop shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, where priests would pray for their recovery. Some were bound and carried. Others walked, still twitching and jerking. At the shrine, religious rituals were performed. Prayers were offered. Holy water was sprinkled. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dancing began to subside. By early September, the outbreak was over. The dancers, exhausted and traumatized, returned to their lives. The dead were buried. The city tried to move on, but the memory of what had happened lingered, a dark reminder of how fragile the line between order and chaos truly was. The dancing plague of 1518 became controversial, not because of the dancing itself, but because of the inability of authorities, physicians, and religious leaders to explain or control it. The controversy lay in the clash between competing explanations, the failure of medical intervention, and the disturbing implications of what the outbreak revealed about society, mind, and body. The most immediate source of controversy was medical. Physicians, relying on humoral theory, diagnosed the outbreak as a fever of the blood. Their treatment, encouraging more dancing, was based on sound medical logic of the time. Yet, it clearly made the situation worse. The failure of this approach raised uncomfortable questions. If the best medical minds of the age could not explain or stop the dancing, what did that say about the limits of medical knowledge? The controversy was not just about a failed treatment. It was about the credibility of an entire medical system. Religious authorities offered a different explanation. They believed the dancing was divine punishment, a curse sent by Saint Vitus to punish the sinful city. This interpretation was widely accepted by the population, who already believed that disasters were caused by God's wrath. The controversy here lay in the implication. If the dancing was divine punishment, then the people themselves were to blame. Religious leaders used the outbreak to reinforce guilt, shame, and fear, deepening the psychological torment of those already suffering. The third explanation, whispered but not widely spoken, was demonic possession. Some believed that the dancers were inhabited by demons or evil spirits. This interpretation carried dangerous implications. If the dancers were possessed, they could be seen not as victims, but as threats. Accusations of witchcraft were common in this period, and the dancing plague could easily have spiraled into witch hunts and executions. Fortunately, this did not happen in Strasbourg, but the fear lingered. The controversy also extended to the city's response. The decision to hire musicians and open dance halls was well-intentioned, but catastrophic. Critics argued that the authorities had lost control, that their intervention had fueled the hysteria rather than calming it. The fact that people died while officials encouraged dancing was seen as a profound failure of governance. The controversy was not just about what caused the dancing, but about who was responsible for allowing it to escalate. Socially, the dancing plague exposed the fragility of order in a society already on the brink. The outbreak revealed how quickly collective behavior could spiral into chaos. It showed that under the right conditions, fear, stress, and religious fervor could override rational thought and self-control. The dancing was not just a medical or religious phenomenon. It was a social one, a manifestation of a community under unbearable strain. Finally, the controversy lay in the silence that followed. After the outbreak ended, there was no official inquiry, no comprehensive investigation, no attempt to understand what had truly happened. The dancing plague was treated as an anomaly, something to be forgotten rather than studied. This silence reflected a deeper discomfort. The outbreak raised questions that the authorities, physicians, and religious leaders could not answer, and so they chose not to ask. The consequences of the dancing plague of 1518 were both immediate and enduring, affecting the lives of those who danced, the city of Strasbourg, and the broader understanding of mass phenomena. At its core, the plague left a legacy of trauma, unanswered questions, and a haunting reminder of the limits of human control over the mind and body. For the dancers themselves, the consequences were severe. Many died during the outbreak, succumbing to heart failure, stroke, or exhaustion. Those who survived were left physically broken. Their feet were mangled, their bodies weakened, and many were unable to work or care for themselves. Psychologically, the trauma was profound. Survivors lived with the memory of having lost control of their own bodies, of having danced while their minds screamed for them to stop. Some never fully recovered, haunted by the experience for the rest of their lives. For the families of the dancers, the consequences were equally devastating. They watched helplessly as loved ones danced themselves to death. They buried husbands, wives, children, and friends. The social fabric of the community was torn. Trust in authorities, physicians, and religious leaders was shaken. The city had failed to protect them, and that failure left scars that did not heal. Economically, the plague disrupted the city. Markets closed, work stopped, resources were diverted to managing the crisis. The dead needed to be buried, the sick needed to be cared for, and the city had to recover from weeks of chaos. The cost, both in lives and in productivity, was significant. Medically, the dancing plague had long-term consequences for the understanding of mass psychogenic illness. Although physicians at the time could not explain the outbreak, later scholars recognized it as a case of mass hysteria, a phenomenon where psychological stress manifests as physical symptoms that spread through a population. The dancing plague became a reference point for understanding how collective fear, religious fervor, and social pressure can produce real, observable physical effects. Religiously, the plague reinforced existing beliefs about divine punishment and the power of saints. The fact that the outbreak ended after prayers at the shrine of Saint Vitus was taken as proof that the dancing had been a curse and that religious intervention had lifted it. This interpretation strengthened the authority of the Church and deepened the culture of fear and guilt that pervaded medieval and early modern Europe. Culturally, the dancing plague entered the folklore of Strasbourg and the broader Alsace region. It was remembered in songs, stories, and warnings passed down through generations. The plague became a symbol of what could happen when a society reached its breaking point, when fear and suffering overwhelmed reason and order. In this sense, the consequences of the dancing plague extended far beyond the summer of 1518. It became a case study in the fragility of the human mind under stress, a reminder that the boundary between sanity and madness is not fixed, but fluid, shaped by circumstances beyond individual control. The dancers did not choose to dance. They were driven by forces, psychological, social, religious, that they could neither understand nor resist. And when the dancing stopped, the questions remained. The legacy of the dancing plague of 1518 is one of mystery, terror, and enduring fascination. What began as a single woman dancing in the streets of Strasbourg became one of the most documented and debated cases of mass psychogenic illness in history. The plague left behind a legacy that speaks to the power of the human mind, the influence of culture, and the fragility of social order, belief. At the most immediate level, the dancing plague left a legacy of fear. For generations, the people of Strasbourg remembered the summer when hundreds danced themselves to death. The event became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what could happen when divine wrath or collective madness descended upon a community. Parents warned their children, priests invoked the plague in sermons. The memory was kept alive not as history, but as warning. Medically, the dancing plague became a foundational case in the study of mass hysteria and psychogenic illness. Modern researchers have analyzed the outbreak extensively, proposing various theories to explain what happened. The most widely accepted explanation is mass psychogenic illness, a condition where psychological stress manifests as physical symptoms that spread through social networks. In 1518, the population of Strasbourg was under extreme stress from famine, disease, and religious fear. The belief in Saint Vitus's curse provided a cultural framework for the outbreak. Once Frau Trophea began dancing, others, already on the edge of psychological collapse, followed. The dancing was real, but its cause was not physical. It was psychological, social, and cultural. Alternative theories have been proposed. Some researchers have suggested ergot poisoning, caused by a fungus that grows on rye and produces compounds similar to LSD. Ergot poisoning can cause convulsions, hallucinations, and uncontrolled movements. However, this theory has been largely discredited because ergot poisoning also causes severe gastrointestinal symptoms, which were not reported in Strasbourg. Additionally, ergot-induced movements are typically spasmodic, not rhythmic, and do not explain the sustained, coordinated dancing described by witnesses. Another theory suggests that the dancing was a form of religious ecstasy or trance, induced by communal rituals or mass suggestion. While trance states have been documented in various cultures, the dancing plague differs in that the dancers were not willing participants. They were suffering, not celebrating. The dancing was not ecstatic, it was torturous. Culturally, the dancing plague has left a legacy in art, literature, and popular imagination. It has been referenced in paintings, novels, and films as a symbol of collective madness and the thin line between civilization and chaos. The image of hundreds of people dancing uncontrollably until they collapse has become an enduring metaphor for societal breakdown and the limits of rational control. Psychologically, the plague highlights the power of belief. The dancers believed they were cursed by Saint Vitus. That belief, combined with extreme stress and social reinforcement, manifested as real physical compulsion. The mind, under the right conditions, can override the body's self-preservation instincts. The dancers could not stop, not because they were physically unable, but because their minds had been shaped by a culture that told them they were powerless against divine punishment. Finally, the legacy of the dancing plague is a reminder of the importance of understanding the social and psychological context of epidemics. The outbreak was not just a medical event. It was a social crisis, born from famine, fear, and religious terror. The dancers were not irrational. They were responding to a world that had become unbearable. Their dancing was a symptom of a society in collapse. In the end, the dancing plague of 1518 was not about dancing. It was about suffering. It was about a population pushed beyond endurance, desperate for relief and unable to find it. The dancers did not choose to dance. They danced because their world had left them no other choice. And when the music finally stopped, the silence that followed was not peace. It was the exhausted quiet of a city that had survived, barely, and would never forget.